There was a time in Britain when a deafening shift on a car assembly line could give an ordinary worker something many modern white-collar jobs no longer can: a home, a family income, and a future that actually felt secure. So what happened to the giant factories where tens of thousands built cars, earned solid money, and held entire towns together? Step inside the thunder of Longbridge and Dagenham, where the air smelled of oil, the lines never seemed to stop, and an ordinary factory wage could still buy a decent life. Before the closures, before the derelict land, before Britain stopped making so much of what it used to rely on, these places formed the backbone of working prosperity. Modern Britain has more office jobs, more service jobs, and more digital work than ever. So why do so many people feel poorer, more anxious, and further from owning anything at all? To answer that, we need to go back to the age of the giant British factory. Longbridge covered 140 acres, a maze of steel and brick that operated like a city behind factory gates. Dagenham, even larger at 300 acres along the Thames, stretched its rooftops and chimneys toward the horizon. Each plant was a self-contained world with dozens of buildings, including assembly halls, paint shops, and engine blocks, rising side by side. At Longbridge, 55 buildings mapped out the flow of production, from the old press shop to the 5-story body hall. Dagenham's 70 buildings included the Cortina line, Fiesta Hall, and a diesel foundry that echoed day and night. Private rail sidings fed these giants. Longbridge's own line joined the Great Western Main Line, while Dagenham's yard linked to the Great Eastern. Trains arrived daily, unloading steel, engines and crates of parts. Shift changes brought tides of workers, thousands stepping off company buses and trams, flooding through the gates in blue overalls. The Birmingham Longbridge station and London's Barking routes became arteries, drawing people from suburbs and towns into the heart of the machine. Supplier yards stood ready by the main gates. Longbridge's Austin Morris yard filled 12 acres and Dagenham's annex, 8 acres, buzzed with subcontractors. Inside, lines ran almost non-stop, piecing together minis, metros, cortinas and escorts. The plants pulsed with life, canteens serving thousands, apprenticeship schools training new hands, football pitches and gyms keeping spirits high. For many, the factory was more than work. It was the center of a mapped-out, possible life. A single pay stub from 1955 tells its own story. The worker's name has faded, but the numbers remain sharp. A basic wage, a line for overtime paid at time and a half, and a neat sum at the bottom, just over £6.10 after tax and national insurance. Overtime was not a rare windfall. It was a regular feature, expected and planned for, especially during busy spells on the line. 5 or 6 hours extra each week could lift a factory wage by nearly £1, enough to tip a household budget from anxious to secure. That extra pay made the difference. The average weekly rent for a council house in 1955 was about 12 shillings, less than a tenth of take-home pay. Groceries for a family of 4 cost around £6, with utilities another 30 shillings. The numbers add up to something almost unthinkable today. After covering the basics, a factory worker's pay could leave a small surplus. A single wage, topped up by overtime, paid for the roof, the food, the bus pass, and still left enough for a holiday fund or a new coat when winter came in. The line between stability and struggle was thin, but predictable. Overtime and shift premiums were written into union agreements, not handed out as favors. The pay was hard-earned, long shifts, noise, and aching hands, but it was steady. Many workers bought their first cars, often the same models they helped build: an Austin Mini, a Ford Cortina, a Morris 1100. The numbers on that old pay stub are more than history. They are a window into a time when work though tough, could still buy a measure of dignity and a future built on one wage. A factory job at Longbridge or Dagenham was never just about the payslip. It was a ladder, sometimes a steep one, but solid. Boys of 16 entered as apprentices, their names inked into registers kept in the training college office. The scheme ran for 5 years, mixing classroom theory with hands-on work beside older craftsmen. By the end, an apprentice could strip and rebuild an engine, read a blueprint, and pass the union's exam. The certificate was not just a piece of paper, it was a passport to skilled work, higher pay, and, often, a sense of belonging. Unions anchored this world. The Transport and General Workers Union, and later Unite, kept a board in the canteen listing shop stewards, overtime agreements, and the latest pension rates. Collective bargaining delivered more than just headline pay. Overtime rates, sick pay, and even the right to a hot meal in the canteen were negotiated and written into contracts. Pension accrual ticked up steadily. 2% of salary added each year, a promise of security decades down the line. Factories built their own communities. Football teams, social clubs, and subsidized holidays sprang from union funds and management grants. The sense of dignity did not come from the noise or the hours, but from the knowledge that the job could open doors, a mortgage, a car, a future. These supports, apprenticeships, unions, and shared spaces, turned hard work into a stable life. Their presence made the difference between just scraping by and being able to build something lasting. By the late 1970s, the factory gates that once promised steady work and a future began to close more often than they opened. Imported cars, once a rare sight, started filling British driveways. In 1970, foreign-built vehicles made up less than 10% of the UK market. By the mid-1980s, that share had soared past 50%, with Japanese and European models undercutting British prices and outlasting them on reliability. The pressure on Longbridge and Dagenham was relentless. Management, desperate to compete, turned to automation, robotic welders, computerized paint lines, and fewer hands on the line. Overtime, once a lifeline for families, was the first casualty. Where a line worker could once count on 5 or 6 hours extra each week, by the early 1990s, overtime had shrunk to a trickle. The social contract began to unravel. Decisions were made in boardrooms far from the shop floor. Cost-cutting became the only strategy, even as unions tried to hold the line. Redundancy notices arrived in batches. In April 2005, Longbridge fell silent. The last car rolled off the line, and thousands of workers left, with nothing but a severance letter and a memory of what the factory had meant. Dagenham's main assembly line followed a similar path, its workforce cut and recut until only a shadow remained. The collapse was not a single event, but a slow-motion fracture, with imports flooding in, automation squeezing out jobs, and the final blow delivered when the numbers no longer added up. Where there had once been security and pride, only uncertainty remained. Where once the sound of presses and the hum of assembly lines filled the air, the old factory grounds now sprawl with retail parks and logistics depots. At Longbridge, the blueprint for a new era was drawn in planning offices, not engineering bays. The master plan called for nearly 50 retail and leisure units, rows of chain stores, coffee shops and budget gyms where the paint shop and engine hall once stood. Dagenham followed a similar path, its former assembly halls divided into dozens of retail spaces and a logistics hub for delivery vans and pallets. The transformation is more than a change of scenery. The jobs that replace the line are different in every way that matters. Where a single factory wage could once support a family, the new roles, such as part-time retail, 0-hours contracts, and warehouse shifts, rarely offer the same security or overtime that tipped a household from scraping by to saving. The employment multiplier tells its own quiet story. In the old days, every job on the line spun out 2 or 3 more in the local economy, suppliers, cafes, mechanics, bus drivers. Today, a retail or warehouse job creates just a fraction of that ripple, closer to one extra job for every new hire. For small business owners and shop staff, there is pride in keeping the tills ringing, but the sense of building something lasting is harder to find. The scale has shrunk, the future less certain. The old promise that a job could buy a life has faded into memory, replaced by the daily calculation of hours, shifts, and what is left after the rent is paid. For a young family today, the numbers tell a different story. The average house in Britain now costs around 10 times the median annual wage, a figure that would have stunned anyone on the line at Longbridge or Dagenham. In the 1970s, a single factory income could often secure a mortgage. Now, even 2 full-time paychecks can struggle to clear the hurdle. The old dream of one wage buying a home has slipped out of reach for most. Childcare, once a modest line in the family budget or covered by relatives, now drains over £20 a week for each child in full-time care. For many parents, that's a sum that rivals the cost of a weekly shop, sometimes more. The gap between what work pays and what life costs has grown wider, especially for those in retail, logistics, or hospitality jobs that replaced the old factories. 6 out of 10 households now rely on 2 earners just to keep up, according to the latest census. For younger residents in places like Dagenham or Birmingham, the idea of building a future on a single steady wage feels almost mythical. The numbers are plain. It's not just that wages haven't kept up, but that the core building blocks of an ordinary life, housing, childcare, security, have drifted further out of reach. The sense of possibility that once came with a job on the line has been replaced by a quiet, grinding uncertainty. Today, a single full-time wage rarely brings the keys to a home or the confidence to plan a future. The Mini and Cortina may be museum pieces, but the questions they leave behind are urgent. What does it mean when real security slips out of ordinary hands? Share your thoughts below.